I'm Eric Smith, I'm from BBC Radio Shropshire. If we haven't met, I present Breakfast. They've worked me in to do this one because, well, I can ask a few difficult questions of this gentleman for a start, and I've done many, many times. But it's not my gig tonight, it's yours. That's the whole point of it. So we'll get to that in a little while, and you have your chance to ask questions and have your say in a little while. But let's get underway formally then. And first of all, to open proceedings here tonight, Councillor Keith Barrow, who is the leader of the Council for Shropshire Council. Keith.
Well, I haven't got a microphone because I've got a loud voice, so if you can't hear me, I'll switch over to a microphone. So if you're struggling, just put your hands up. So can I welcome everybody tonight? Thank you for coming. It's a good turnout. We're delighted that so many of you come along because we've got a problem. The council, as some of you, well, all of you are probably aware, doesn't have a great record with pieces of public art. We've had 1 or 2 disasters over the years, and Lord Hill is such an important and iconic part of Shrewsbury that we felt it's important to have a conversation with the public and see what you think. We'll explain our problems, our difficulties, not least of which is we've got to find another £80 million worth of savings over the next 3.5 years. But we have a responsibility to Lord Hill and the column. Somebody asked me at the beginning, is there any point in us coming to this meeting because you've probably already made your mind up? Well, we haven't. We haven't got a solution. This is not a publicity exercise. It's a genuine attempt to engage with you guys and for you to try and help us find a solution. I was talking with a young couple here earlier who live locally, and of course they saw the fencing going around Lord Hill because in March last year a chunk fell off him. Another chunk fell off in December, and to be frank, he's not in the best of condition. What you see up there, only the size of my hand is original. All the rest has been patched up over the years. And what do we do with him? He's 17 foot tall. He was designed to be looked at from the ground. So if you took him down and stuck him at ground level, he looks totally out of proportion. So as you can see, there are various issues around the statue, and hopefully at the end of tonight, you'd have learned a little bit more. Some of you might be here. Actually, I was talking to one gentleman who probably knows a lot more than I do, and I'm sure a lot of you know more than I do. But we'll try to tell you a little bit of the history and the background, and you will have an opportunity to question us. And what I really hope for is you'll come forward with some good ideas and suggestions on what we can do. And it's a long-term solution we're looking at to solve the problem that is Lord Hill. And with that, I'm going to introduce you to Paul, who's going to take us through a little bit of the history. Thank you.
Paul Ridgely, by the way, is from the Waterloo Association. Right, so if anybody knows about Lord Hill, it's this gentleman here. And there's the man himself in the picture.
Thanks, Eric. Evening, everybody. I've got a quarter of an hour to tell you all about the life of Lord Hill, so I'm going to gloss over it very quickly. Okay. Most people, when they look at the column, and you ask them who's Lord Hill, they'll probably tell you that he was Wellington's friend, or he was number 2 in command at the Battle of Waterloo. Okay. Yes, he was Wellington's friend, and great friends right the way through their lives together. And no, he wasn't deputy or second in command at Waterloo, because Wellington never had deputies. Lord Hill was one of the 2 corps commanders in charge of the British Army. Okay, carrying on about who he was, this came from the Shropshire Star the other night, and it's from Watchdog. Pull this monstrosity down. Why is this town commemorating a pirate who built a fortune for the East India Company on the broken backs of India's peasants? He wasn't a pirate, he wasn't a sailor, and he never went to India. I wrote a letter to the Star, but they wouldn't publish it, I'm afraid. Anyway, carry on. Sorry?
They don't publish my letters either.
I know the feeling. Born in 1772 at Prees Hall, which still stands, it's opposite the church in Prees. Okay, part of the enormous Hill family who had the family seat at Hawkston. Joined the army at 17 after schooling at Bykefield, which is in North Shropshire, and at Chester. Okay, so he is a local lad, there's no doubt about that. Joined the army at 17, and he carried on campaigns in Flanders, in India, and also the siege of Toulon. Okay, so we had a fair bit of a mixture before he went on to the Peninsular War, when that started in 1808. I won't go into the history of it, but basically Portugal was on our side. Napoleon didn't like that and decided that he would rampage through Spain with Spain's okay, take Portugal, and he would blockade British ships going into the Mediterranean. It all went wrong for him, and if you've probably read it, from 1808 to 1814, the Duke of Wellington fought an endless war right the way through the plains and the mountains of Spain to drive the French out. During that time, Lord Hill was given independent command of his own army. He was the only officer in the whole of the British Army that Wellington trusted enough to give him his own sorry to see you. His own army. Okay, nobody else was trusted by Wellington. So we look at the maps of Spain. We have Wellington in the north and Lord Hill in the south. Okay, with his own troops. During his time in the south of Spain, there are a couple of incidents that I want to tell you about, a couple of actions. In 1811, General Girard, the French general, was starting to move inwards into Wellington's territory, and he was starting to threaten the British army of Wellington. Okay. Hill saw this, and he moved across to attack Girard. Girard found out what was going on and started to move back in a zigzag formation to fool Hill as to where he was going. But Hill moved day and night, whereas Girard was resting his troops and going in a zigzag. Hill moved through the night, it was a direct line. It was such a horrendous journey that they had to take the cannon to pieces and carry the cannon barrels and carry the wheels because they couldn't get them through the mountain passes. They had to leave the cavalry behind because the horses couldn't get through the passes, and they had to literally drag the cannon. And working all this out, and with his guys up in front there, which he had spies working for him, as they all did even then in the 1800s, he decided that he would surprise Girard's army and attack him. And he attacked him at a place called Arroyo des Molinos. Okay, and the name is on the plaque on the column. Okay, and about 4 o'clock in the morning, in a raining, horrendous thunderstorm, okay, Hill's army attacked and surprised the whole of Girard's army. Okay, he'd also worked out a pincer movement around the area that they were camped in, and as the French fled, the cavalry were able to move in and take prisoners. Okay, for all the fighting that went on in that early morning, right up to lunchtime, yeah, when Girard's army was completely decimated, the British lost 7 men killed and about 100 odd injured. Okay, the French had horrendous losses. Okay, as a result of that, Hill was granted the title of Grand Commander of the Bath. Okay, so that's his very first big award. The next year, we go on to a place called Almaraz, and this was a bridge, a pontoon bridge, which connected across the River Tagus. Both sides of this bridge were French armies, and they were coming together at Almaraz to attack Wellington. And again, Hill in the south found out about this. So he decided that this wasn't on, he was going to stop these armies. So they're both French armies are now coming towards Almaraz, and Hill, who has less than half of their troops, okay, goes towards them to attack Almaraz. Okay, and again, he goes into the battle straight away. There are 3 forts at Almaraz. Okay, there's Fort Napoleon, Fort Ragusa, and the Mirabeau Castle. And he puts a feint on at the Mirabeau Castle, so that they think that that's where the main attack is. And the guys in Fort Ragusa think, oh, that's interesting, and they go around and they're all watching the battle. While they're watching that, which is a feint, remember, okay, the majority of Hill's guys come up the back of this fort, and they get into the fort without the guys even knowing about it, because they're all looking that way. Okay, so they capture that fort, then they turn the guns of that fort onto Fort Napoleon and smash that fort. Mirabeau is too big a task to take on. Okay, he realises he can't do anything with the castle, but what he does do, he destroys the dockyards, the bridges, he blows up the 2 the 2 forts that he's got, okay, and he retires. Again, the damage done was such that the bridge was never rebuilt by the French because they just couldn't do it. And all their munitions, their gunpowder, their cartridges, their food stocks were all burnt. Okay, so that's that one. Go on to, I'm looking at the time, going on to Lake Peninsula, after Victoria, after the Battle of Victoria, which was a very decisive battle in 1813, Hill and Wellington now joined together to force the French into their own country. And one of the battles was at the Battle of the River Neve, okay, which is a very, very wide river going into the French countryside, very mountainous. As always, Hill was in the forefront, and he took his 14,000 men across the river at the forefront of the British Army, where the French were waiting. Virtually as soon as his troops had gone over there, and there's 14,000 of them, okay, the whole bridge collapses because there's a flood. And Hill is stranded on the north side of the river, okay, and Wellington's main army is now on the south side of the river, and there's no chance of Wellington's army getting to it. Marshal Soult, the French commander, sees what's happening, and he has 32,000 men, okay, and he says, right, I'm going to wipe out this lot. And he turns his 32,000 men and he attacks Hill. And all that the Wellington's army could do is watch what's going on. Okay. And at the Battle of Saint-Pierre, which is named after the village that was there, Hill held the whole 32,000 all day, okay, with 14,000 men. Eventually, Hill's centre was collapsing, okay, under the pressure of time and time again the attacks by the French. And as his centre was collapsing, he literally took a great move. He moved both of his sides in, rather like a game of chess, into the centre, okay, and then he pushed the lot back. The French were so surprised with this terrific attack now, with literally the whole army had squeezed up and gone that way, yeah, that they ran. And Hill just wiped them out, okay, and he actually beat 32,000 men, which if you look on any odds, you just can't do, okay. We go on to the Battle of Waterloo, which is in 1815, and with Napoleon in the south now, coming up through to Brussels, he's threatening Brussels because this is his object. Okay, and between him and Brussels is Wellington's army. Wellington has to think very carefully about the manoeuvres that are going on here, because although he's protecting Brussels, he has to protect the route of the British army if they get beaten. And the way that Napoleon would have done this, and he knows it very well, is that Napoleon would have took, if we look at the British right flank, yeah, which is to the west, Napoleon would come round the west and he would secure Ostend, and the British army would be trapped because there was no other way the British could get off the continent. And so again, in that battle, he put Hill on the right-hand side, as he had at the Battle of Busaco in the Peninsular War, to stop any threat of moving round. Okay. In the instance, it wasn't needed because Napoleon just kept hitting him head-on like a battering ram. Okay, trying to break the centre, but it didn't work. But Hill was again in the most awkward position as he was throughout his history. Okay, at the Battle of Waterloo, Hill was, his horse was shot. I think in his whole life, I'm counting 9 horses that were shot from under him because he was a guy that led from the front. But his horse was shot from under him. He was knocked unconscious. In the melee, he was lost for about half an hour. But he eventually got to his feet and was able to rejoin his troops. 3 of his brothers were actually at the battle as well. Robert Chambray Hill, who was commanding the Horse Guards, he was shot through the shoulder and into the neck, but survived. Clement was sabred by a French. He came back from the charge and he had a French cavalry sabre through his thigh, through his saddle and into his horse. Okay, so I think that probably hurt a bit. And his other brother Noel was unscathed. Okay, so that was the Battle of Waterloo in a nutshell. After that, came back here. The column had been built in 1814, or started to be built in 1814, and I won't go into the column because that's what we're here for, and somebody else will talk about it. But Hill came back to rapturous applause. He was taken to the quarry after all the salutations in London. He had the dinners, the speeches, presentation swords were given to him in Birmingham, in London, but he came back here and they had a big session for him in the quarry. 20,000 people went out into the quarry to meet him. and had a wonderful time until it got so bad that there was so much pressure of people who wanted to shake his hand and pat him on the back that he said to one of his colleagues, "I've never run away from the French, but today I've got to run away from my friends." Okay. He was taken through the streets here in a carriage at Chester. He was hauled through the streets by the men who actually took the horses off, and they actually, as a mark of respect, pulled him through the streets as a hero. In 1826, he was made Commander-in-Chief of the British Army. Okay, and he carried on that duty right the way through till 3 months before his death in 1842. And in that time, he introduced barracks, he introduced physical education, the Bible and the teachings of the Bible were brought into use, and he did his utmost to stop physical punishment. You know, that's the lash, which he never really thought about. And he was able to introduce a cell system where, you know, you went to the cells for 7 days rather than have 100 lashes, which was a horrible way of treating men. Okay. Died in 1842 in December. He was entitled to be buried. He was gold stick to Queen Victoria as Commander-in-Chief of the Army. In other words, he was Victoria's protector. Okay, and she wanted him buried in St Paul's or Westminster, but he didn't want that, and he's buried at Hadnall Church. Okay, if you go in there, there's a small little monument to him, lovely monument, and he's actually buried underneath the tower of the church with his 2 sisters. Okay, and if you want to get in there in time, can I just tell you, there's a farm on the other side of the road, opposite the church gates, and it's got 2 big white gates, and if you go in there and ask the lady, she'll give you the key, and you can pop in and just have a look at the monument. That's just about right for me. I'm sorry it's been rushed, we asked that for time, but I hope that gives you some insight into this guy who was a really fantastic commander, a terrific battlefield tactician, and somebody that we should not forget in many, many years to come. Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Who'd have thought it? The Battle of Waterloo in under 3 minutes. Brilliant. How long could you do if we let you go? 40.
We do 40.
40 minutes. Yeah. Good man. For condensing it into 15. Thank you very much. Right. This is Colin Richards. You will hear from Colin twice in the next 20 minutes or so. But Colin is Historic Environment Manager with Shropshire Council. A bit of a history about the Colin.
That's right. Well, thank you, Paul. That's set the scene incredibly well, and it also demonstrates the affection by which Lord Hill was regarded locally. So when people wanted to recognise that, they wanted to pull out all the stops and create a monument which articulated not only his stature, but also the regard that he was held nationally in terms of incorruptibility, the rule of the law, and strength. And so the best architects of the day were engaged to design and construct the column. And the Doric column is a column which is used throughout the world to emphasise that rule of law, that incorruptibility, that sobriety which Lord Hill was regarded for. And the most famous example is perhaps the Parthenon in Athens. So the precedent in Shrewsbury of this type of architecture was well set and well known. At the time when the column was constructed, it was begun in 1814, as we said, by public subscription. The engineering challenge that was presented to the stonemasons was incredible, because they were wanting to construct this monumental structure, 133 feet high, carrying over 1,000 tons of weight on a location which is, the footprint of it is relatively small. So the masons had to be very, very precise in terms of carving these blocks, which would be locked together. And as they went up, they had to keep a level sort of base, a level on which the next stones would be set. And today you can climb to the top of that tower and you can put a spirit level on the plinth where Lord Hill is set, and the bubble is in the middle of the level. An incredible testament to the masons and to the engineers who constructed it. They wanted to use the best stone that was available, a free stone which would be able to take the flute in and not be subject to lamination or the worst ravages of the weather. And so they used a local stone, Greens Hill stone. It was exported across the country, but it was available locally. And that stone was used, and we still use it today. It's a very high quality stone. And the masons themselves, the banker masons, they would work to 1/64th of an inch. You know, if we're doing sort of DIY carpentry, you know, a lot of us, if we get to the nearest sort of quarter of an inch, we're quite proud. But these lads were working to 1/64th of an inch in tolerance. And the great thing is that when we come to do the restoration, we still have masons, young masons that are coming on. This is at the college in Telford, who will be able to replicate that type of skill. So when we come to do the repairs, although they're working with history, touching history, and working almost alongside the masons that would have worked in 1814, we have that capability today. Sorry, Sarah, it's over to you now, but essentially the column is, as we said, it represents that form of reference of Lord Hill perched on the top, the lions at the base, and this is an iconic structure in Shrewsbury skyline. And when you look at that footprint with round stone, which hasn't deflected over 200 years, it's an incredible engineering achievement.
About why it's listed, and why it's listed at grade 2-star. And I suppose it's sometimes rather easy to think that perhaps things are listed because someone from a national organisation came along and thought, that's a fine example of a piece of architecture, we'll list it. And why? How can we understand objectively the reasons for listing? So at English Heritage we've devised a system of trying to work out, take away the subjectivity of the exercise and put it more objectively. And so we've divided the significance of listed structures into different parts. So there's the historical and the evidential value of any listed structure. And I think in this instance, the statue of Lord Hill is evidence of the use of this particular material called Codestone, which was manufactured by Mrs. Code in her factory in London on the West Bank, roughly where the Queen Elizabeth Hall is at the moment. It's a twice-fired ceramic material, incredibly durable, and capable of withstanding high levels of atmospheric pollution, which is seen in the number of Codestone statues which still exist in really quite polluted places like London. It's evidence of a system of construction, because in actual fact when you look at the statue of Lord Hill, it's comprised of 13 different parts held together by metal cramps. And although the outer surface that you look at now is largely replacement material, actually the core of the structure is really very whole. It survives actually in remarkably good condition underneath that. It's just the surface detailing which has been lost. We know it was made in 13 parts because it's been taken to bits back in the early 90s and repaired, and the rusting metal cramps that were the original ones put in to keep it together when it was first erected were all replaced with a non-ferrous armature to avoid that kind of problem occurring in the future. So we understand in terms of keeping it, we understand how it was made, and that's of interest to architectural historians. Codestone wasn't the first artificial stone material, there were earlier ones, but it was the most successful to be patented, and it was manufactured from the 1770s right the way through to the 1830s. It was used typically for decorative items on buildings, so the kinds of plaques and swags and door cases, ornamental urns, all those sorts of things, which could be easily mass-produced once you'd got a mould. And at Eleanor Code's factory, they were expert in making high-quality moulds so that they could churn out these architectural detailings to be used by other architects. And they were really popular with the architects of the day. So they were used by the best architects, people like Robert Adam, Capability Brown in his garden designs, John Nash, Soane, Holland, James Wyatt. So all the very best architects of the day patronised Eleanor Code's factory and used this material. It was used at Buckingham Palace. George III was a client. Statues were made of him. It's used in St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. The survival of this statue is evidential value, which has all of those sorts of associations. Obviously, it's also evidence of the way in which people at the time revered Lord Hill himself. And we've heard from Paul about the 20,000 people who flocked to the quarry to show him how much they respected his heroism and valued his role in the Battle of Waterloo and in earlier campaigns. And obviously at that time, this country was very worried about the threat that Napoleon posed, and the threat of revolution and the threat that there was to the system of government and kingly rule that we had in this country. So the end of that threat, effectively, with the positive outcome of the Battle of Waterloo, was a massive relief to this country, and indeed a cause for national celebration. And this is one example of that. There was a fashion for monumental columns in the 19th century, and they were frequently erected to Nelson. He's one of the other heroes of the time that was revered in this way. So there were columns in Trafalgar Square. There were a column in Dublin which had a Codestone statue of Nelson on it, which was unfortunately blown up in the Troubles. There's a Nelson's column in Montreal which had a Codestone statue of Nelson on the top of it, although that has been replaced with a replica, and the original is now in a museum in Montreal. There was also Codestone statues placed on the top of the column at the Nelson Memorial in Great Yarmouth, and again, unfortunately, those have been lost. They've been replaced firstly in concrete and then in fiberglass. We're probably looking really at the last surviving large Codestone structure of this kind in its original location here in Shrewsbury. The fact that it's still there, despite being repaired, is also evidence surely of the durability of the material, and proof that Eleanor Code's claims for her material were well founded. And we should perhaps ask ourselves the question of how well would a stone alternative statue have fared over the last 200 years. We know the statue of Nelson on Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square has been repaired a good number of times, so I suppose it's not surprising perhaps that Lord Hill needs his repairs as well. It also has associative value. Lord Hill, the local man, the inspired tactician, as we've heard from Paul, and also, I think I'm right in saying, seen as a paternal commander of men, and affectionately known as Daddy Hill by some of his troops. It's a good association in an age where we understand the value of human life, but reflecting back on a time when troops were treated in a very different way and seen as tools of war, rather than individuals. It's also in associative value with Eleanor Code herself. Remarkable woman, maintaining a business, very successful business, back in the 19th century, when perhaps we would assume that actually most successful businesses were run by men, but telling perhaps that when she died in 1821, and William Coggan, her business associate, took over the Codestone factory, it only actually lasted another 10 years before it went bankrupt. So perhaps if she'd survived a bit longer, it would have lasted longer as well, and we'd have seen yet more Codestone statues. The other value is aesthetic value, and clearly the column has that high quality design, classical origins. It clearly has aesthetic architectural value. But craftsmanship comes into aesthetic value as well, and Colin has already told us about the highly skilled craftsmen who produced a structure capable of remaining vertical and true 200 years later. And in fact, the craftsmanship of the Codestone statue hasn't really been diminished a great deal by the weathering and repairs that have had to be undertaken. And finally, the last value that we use to take the mystery out of significance is communal value. And I think that clearly this structure has communal value. Everyone that knows Shrewsbury knows Lord Hill's column. It's a wayfinding point, it's a landmark structure. Years ago when I was doing my PhD and studying in Shrewsbury and staying at the youth hostel, I could tell anybody where I was because I could say it's the youth hostel just by Lord Hill's column in Shrewsbury. Everyone understood. So it provides that extra sense of identity and local distinctiveness, which I think imbue it with communal value. So that's why it's listed, and that's why it's listed grade 2 star, because it is outstanding on the national scene, not just locally, but across the country. The role of English heritage in any decision making, because it's grade 2 star, your local council has to refer any application for listed building consent for a 2-star or grade 1 listed building to English heritage for review. So we feed in our comments to that process. It doesn't mean that we get to make the decision, but we like to think that we can influence the decision. And it's a way of providing an extra overview in the decision-making process. So, hope that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Good, Sarah. Nice round of applause. We'll bring Colin back in a sec.
Let me just show of hands, first of all. Has anybody been up Lord Hill's column, as it were, when it was quite a few. Very windy at the top there, isn't it? No? Frighteningly windy at the top of there. So you can imagine a 200-year-old bloke, it's dropped off. And they have dropped off. Where's Colin again? All right, Colin Richards now. And the current condition of Lord Hill's column and the planned repair work, Colin.
Thank you. Well, we've heard of the status, the stature, the sort of cultural aesthetic values which are attributed to this column. But at this point in time, the custody, the care of the column rests with Shropshire Council. As Keith said at the outset, we have to find a way forward in terms of looking after it in the future, or being able to have a representation of this important figure in our history. The reality of the situation is that 200 years later, after this incredible material, this Codestone, has been sat on top of the column, is that it's now starting to deteriorate. And once the material starts to sort of fracture or break down, then we have this ongoing, aggravated series of repairs. And this is the situation that we've been in since the early 90s, really, in that from time to time, you have repairs, you have dissimilar materials applied to the structure, and with the best information and evidence that exists at any one time, this is applied to the structure, but you still get the freeze-thaw cycle, you get movement which can give it a little bit of a sort of tremor from time to time, and you also get the exposure and the south-westerly winds, the rains, and then the frosts which come have all taken its toll in recent years, and particularly his left shoulder, his left arm have been subject to a great deal of damage, and when we look from the ground we're not aware that it's actually starting to sort of fragment, to shatter. And it's these pieces which have started to shale off, which resulted in the fencing going up. And one of the problems we've got is that it's set quite close to Preston Street. And we looked at the projection of the most recent pieces that had come off, and we can't actually put a circular scaffold, circular fence around with a radius that can actually collect the material that's coming down. That's why the scaffold's going up, so that it can actually get up close and around the structure and catch any masonry. Because you can see by the size of the lumps that are just hanging there, that if they went down that kind of distance, there's a momentum, and if anybody gets hit by it, then it's curtains really. So, it's preventative care that we're doing with the scaffolding. We will go through the process of repair. We've been in discussions with English Heritage to sort of dismember him, to basically recast that left arm because it's gone beyond the point of repair. And then when you've got these areas that have a capability to be reinforced or to go to the stainless steel armature that's now within the structure, to be able to tie it all together. But that's going to last probably 5 to 10 years. So the point of the meeting tonight is that, is that something that we just sort of take on the chin and accept that every 5 to 10 years we're going to be involved in spending about 50,000 on it? Or, are there other ways of dealing with it? And it's that discussion and the options that Keith has invited people here tonight. But I think, as you can see, that's the left arm, that's the most vulnerable part of the structure at the moment. You can also see, as Keith said right at the outset, that the profile, the definition of the character, it looks from the ground far more refined than it actually is when you're up close. But the poor structure has had a number of different facelifts with the repairs that have occurred over the years, and some of the finesse of the original design has been lost. But it is a very, very imposing structure when you're actually up there 17 feet high. And obviously, we've the thing that sits on the top, which makes him look as if he's got a sort of little turban on the top, is the lightning conductor. And that's very, very important in terms of being able to avoid any lightning strikes shattering at the moment. The proposal is, we're out to tender at the moment. We're expecting the tenders in on the 18th of September, and then we will probably create an environment, encapsulate the structure to be able to undertake the work this year. If the weather becomes so aggressive, we might need to sort of put climate control in, put heaters in to be able to undertake the work. But the intention is to address these problems as soon as we can, because the report that we've had has said that obviously another winter will create a lot more damage, because there was a survey done in 2010, and the difference between 2010 and 2012 and the photographs we've got on the report is very, very considerable. So the rate of degradation is accelerating. The one thing that has stood up incredibly well is the paint, and the Kime mineral-based paint which it does what it says on the tin. It's flexible and it's breathable, and in the areas which haven't been subject to the physical attrition, you know, it's held up very, very well. So, this is the debate for this evening, and these are the figures that we're looking at, and you know, I think this is where you come in there, Keith, in terms of the engagement with people and with their views.
Yeah, what I should have made clear, what would normally happen when the council makes a decision is a report from officers would be drafted up, it would come to the cabinet, we consult, it would come back to the cabinet, we'd make a decision. But I want to be absolutely clear, we're involving you in the decision-making process. This isn't consultation. I suppose it is in a sense, but we want your help in actually making the decision. You've heard the history, which was fascinating. You've heard the importance of it from English Heritage's point of view, and I'm sure you all know the importance of it from Shrewsbury's point of view. But in hard, cold financial facts, that's what you've got. To repair every 5 or 10 years is somewhere around 55 to 60,000, plus the cost of the scaffolding. You probably saw in the press we put £140,000 in the budget. We hope we don't have to spend that much. But by the time you take the cost of the scaffolding and all the other work and the potential heaters we might have to put in and unforeseen things, that we've had to put that amount in to be sure that we've got the money to do that. We have to repair it because it's dangerous. And then that leads to the replacement one-off costs, which are exactly as you see there, which go anywhere between 350,000, well, to 180,000, 200 seems the main figure, plus costs of scaffolding, fencing, consultants' fees, plus the costs of removing and everything else. We're probably talking somewhere at the top end of £500,000. What do we do? What do you think we should do? And this is the first time I think the council's ever tried to do it this way and involve the public, not just consulting, but actually involve you in the decision-making process.
Can I ask you a question? You actually said you'd put something out to tender already.
We had to.
Back to you. What have you actually asked people to tender for?
We'll get to questions in a sec. Just answer that one.
But I will answer. We've actually got to do something with him. You've seen the pictures. Somebody's going to fall off and kill someone. We can't put fencing around a big enough area to guarantee if something falls off, somebody kills it.
I just wondered what.
So it's scaffolding to go up and to have a temporary repair.
That's your tender.
And that's what we're looking to do. But it's not a long-term solution. It's a temporary solution.
Let's get into some questions and answers,
Shall we? Can I ask Colin and Sarah, can you pull your chairs around a little bit so you're facing the audience here? And we'll use this microphone if we can, because I'm conscious that if somebody at the front here asks a question, those of you at the back may not hear it unless they've got a microphone, okay? We'll talk about money, and yes, you've got right to raise the point of tendering. I just want to ask you one question first. And if you have a particular view, Shan, who should look after and pay for the upkeep or replacement of Lord Hill? Who should it be? Who should foot the bill? Right, that gentleman down there, come to you in a minute, sir. Who should foot the bill for the upkeep, repair and replacement of Lord Hill?
I think part of it should be by English Heritage and part of it should be by Shropshire Council.
Okay, gentleman over here.
Well, I think because of the national importance of our history, then the government, through its agency, like English Heritage, should foot the major cost of replacement.
Okay, anybody else who should foot the bill? Anybody with any strong opinions? Yes, around there. This is the way to keep fit. Let's go. Right.
With the comment about them being Commander-in-Chief of the Army and well received at Waterloo, has anyone thought of approaching the Army to see if they want to put anything into it?
But you've not thought about that one, had you? Or had you?
As a retired Army officer, I know what the answer would be.
Can I guess, sir, what the answer would be? It would be...
Thank you
very much. You thought about that out. Okay, let me give you that so that you can respond between you in a minute or two. Any more comments about who should pay?
I think it should be a partnership between possible should have some sort of control over this. I'm sure Mr. Barrow would kill me putting money in, but I think the County Council should definitely have a hold on what goes on, just to supervise things.
And they should foot some of the bill?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Any more comments on that before we move on then right now? Yes, our army friend again, thank you.
Surely it's got to be worth a bid for the Heritage Lottery Fund.
Keith?
Yeah, we've put a bid into English Heritage already. We'll look at all sources of funding, and we may be lucky. With the Heritage Lottery Fund, we just got a fairly substantial chunk of money for the flax mill, and you can never guarantee it one way or the other. But when you've had a big chunk of money to then go back for more, it's not that hopeful. But we certainly will look at all options.
I hear exactly what you're saying, but if these two facilities are both of national importance, they should both receive favourable consideration by the HLF.
Yeah, I can assure you we will look at all funding streams that we possibly can.
Okay, can you pass it to Sarah? Sarah, you must have known, you must have realised that sort of reaction where, English heritage comes into the frame quite strongly there in terms of, where's the money? You must realise that that's probably going to go your way, isn't it?
Yes, certainly. It's a question that's often asked.
Turn it towards you. Sort of right into it.
Sorry. It's a question that's frequently asked. I suppose English heritage is an arm's length part of the government. It's part of the government in the same way that the army actually is part of the government. If the army don't want to put any money in because they've got cuts,
Yeah, but the army aren't saying it's that important. I mean, they love it. They love it as an individual. But you as an organisation are saying, hang on a minute, just watch what you're doing with this stuff.
And I suppose we're saying that because it's, when I say it's of national heritage value, it's a value for everyone, isn't it? And I'm guessing that most people in the room would feel that it was of some value to them. So yes, English Heritage has funds. Government gives us funds to distribute in the form of grant for the repair and maintenance of all designated assets. So it might be a ruined castle, it might be a listed building, and we have to be really judicious about the way that we spend those funds because in line with all government agencies, our budgets have been cut as well, just as Shropshire Council is facing cuts. So yes, we would love to be able to put our hands up and say, don't worry, we will foot that bill, and it may be that we can make some contribution to it, but if everybody with every statue of this kind, or every listed structure of this kind, or every scheduled monument of this kind asks English Heritage to foot the bill, then literally we don't have that kind of money.
Yeah, but you're special, isn't it? You're special, you said that. Well, get the cheque out of your back pocket.
Yeah, special, yeah. I know, I've got a bag here.
Right, let's talk about how you spend, what you spend money on. There it is. We'll leave that sitting there so you can see it. Any views on which way to go to start with? Anybody got any thoughts on this? Gentleman over here. Right, sir.
Hello, my name's Ross Vickers. I sit on the Shropshire Building Preservation Trust.
Sorry, can't hear a word.
Right, I'm Ross Vickers. I sit on the Shropshire Building Preservation Trust and I see other members here. There's one thing that hasn't been considered, and that's giving him a stainless steel reinforcement on the outside and either a GRC or similar type coating, which there are firms giving 40 years on that. Is this not an option?
A stainless steel reinforcement on the outside and a GRC coating.
Colin, got any views on that?
Right, thank you. In '93, all the steel was taken out and stainless steel put in, and it's the sort of combination of materials that's on it in terms of conservation, trying to keep as much of the original, then patching it up. That's perhaps sort of part of the problem today. What you're suggesting is giving it, stripping that back, using the stainless steel, and then putting another coating on the top.
No, he's not. Hang on a minute. Go on. Right.
No, leaving intact.
Close it, Kat.
Take anything that's going to fall off, but then give him a coat externally, which will be keyed back into the sound structure, and then virtually a render in GRC. Possibly for...
That's glass reinforced concrete,
yes.
For people who don't know.
Which would be, well, even if it was 300 thick, it wouldn't make any difference to the look at that height.
We will take advice from the consultants. It's something that we'll note from the meeting that there are different technologies. I think the important point that you're making is that the vulnerability lies with the different materials at the moment and the way they move. What you're suggesting is a skin, a protected skin, which would avoid that differential movement. Well, thank you for that. Yeah.
Keith, if the view was to replace it with either £180,000 worth or right up to the top £350,000, we've got the money.
No. But at least that would be a decision we could move forward on, and we could look to get the money. We could apply for grants, we could go out to the public for a public subscription, and at least we'd have a long-term goal. We'd know where we were heading. At the moment, as I said before, no decisions being made.
Right, lady over there, gentleman over there. No, big problem. Yes, gentleman over here. Here we are. So,
could I suggest that we put the poor fellow out of his misery, bring him down off that column before he falls down? And could we not then build something up at the top in the way of an extension of the column, and possibly put a hologram or something modern in the shape of a hill up there, or not below the platform?
Sarah, how would you feel about that? We take it down altogether and put something modern up there, a hologram even.
Well, clearly that sort of approach has been taken in the past. They took Nelson off the column in Montreal and put him in the museum before he started falling to bits too much. And replaced him with a stone statue in that instance. And as I mentioned, the Great Yarmouth Nelson Memorial, they also had to replace the figures there. So there are precedents for that, and it's something that can be considered. But I suppose it is a slightly complicated option, because it leaves you with the issue of what you do with him once you've got him down. And if we go back to the values that are invested in him, the evidential value of the use of codestone that will be lost if we grind him up and put him in a skip, then I suppose you're left thinking, so what do we do with him? He's 17 foot tall, he's quite large really, where could you put him? You probably have to do some repairs to him anyway, because he looks a bit grim at the moment, doesn't he, all cracked like that. So you probably end up spending some money repairing him anyway, and then you'd have to maintain him wherever he was kept, and make sure that the place where he was maintained as well.
Do you want to keep him, or do you want to keep him up there as English heritage?
I think it's a very hard question to answer.
Good, my track record sustained.
And if I'm perfectly frank, I don't have a view at the moment, not a firm view, because of the view that English Heritage would take has to be informed by this exercise that we're going through now, and it also has to be informed by a full understanding of what the costs are, and what the options would be if he was taken down, and I don't think that those options have been fully explored at the moment.
But it's hardly surprising, Sarah, is it, that in these austere times you have a local council here who say, we can't afford this. And if they said to you, we can't afford it to the extent that we have to take him down, that's it. Nothing else goes on top of it, or some modern structure, whatever you like. How English Heritage would be distinctly unhappy.
They would. But at the end of the day, the decision is one for Shropshire Council to take, taking into account English Heritage's views. And the only way that English Heritage can prevent that form of decision taking place is if we think that that Shropshire Council is taking such a bad decision that it should be referred to the Secretary of State.
And you'll probably do that, wouldn't you?
Again, I think that at the moment, without the full information, it's impossible to say that. No, so I couldn't say that we would do that right now. No.
Have you thought about getting rid of it altogether?
Well, the problem that Sarah made is a valid one. What would we do with him? You've seen him close up. He ain't exactly pretty. He's falling to bits anyway, so even if you took him down and had somewhere to put him, you'd have to repair him. And if you took him down and threw him in the skip, it would be somewhat of an act of cultural vandalism, wouldn't it?
Okay, right, we didn't recommend that. Where's that gentleman over there? The view on that particular road, coming down your way. Right, this gentleman first of all. Yes, sir, go.
Hi, my name's Kev Pardy. You've got 5 different materials there that you may make a replica from. Can you tell me how often they have to be repaired, and would it be cheaper to repair than the one we have at the moment?
Question.
Colin?
Right. Well, thank you. Our consultants have said that the cast concrete and the bronze, they should be good for 50 years without having anything done to them. The fiberglass, the big problem with that is the ultraviolet light and the way that it would change and possibly bleach out over time. It's quite durable. The risk is that over time it might get brittle. The code, which has been up there for 200 years, that can actually today be replicated in a way where you could get that type of lifespan, certainly 100 years, without expecting major trouble. And the stone, that depends again on atmospheric pollution, on the quality of the stone, but it would be durable, but it would, over time, sort of lose, perhaps some of its definition. But, those are the different characteristics that we've been advised.
So you reckon the code stone, £200,000 would be 100 years?
That's what our consultants would say. Realistically, if you had a very good replica made in that original material, is the most effective and most durable.
And also the one that English Heritage probably would like best, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Is that right? So you like code stone would be the preferred option if you were going to replace?
Yes, I think so, because given that you can replicate the material now, then that would it would presumably be replicated in the same 13 pieces that form him at the moment, and it would be clearly the most suitable thing to do. Yeah.
Okay, right. There were quite a few comments on this row, weren't there?
I was going to say to the question of where should we put it if you were taken down. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go on.
When I saw the original plans for the new music hall, there was going to be at the entrance a huge atrium which was open to the roof, which would be considerable height. And if there were room, there certainly would be headroom in there. I don't know what his circumference is, but it would be amazing to see it there if that's still the plan for the music hall. But can I also say, one of the extraordinary features of the monument was the fact that the Doric column used to be the tallest freestanding Doric column. Was it in the world or in Europe?
Is it still not?
It is.
It is.
So nobody, it's still an extraordinary column. It wouldn't matter what was up there because it isn't likely that health and safety would ever let us go up to see it.
Right, can you move the microphone on to that gentleman there? Right. Down there, you said in a minute. Yeah.
Hi, if you look at places like Florence, all those major statues are all complex, they're all in museums. We need to take it down and repair it. There's plenty of room in the main hall of the music hall, the old, which is part of the museum. We've got height enough for it. Take a hit on it and do it again in Codestone. It lasts 100 years and we've got the best of both worlds.
Codestone?
Yes.
Replacement.
Yes,
Sorry.
Yes,
let's do it properly. Gentleman here. Yes, go on, sir.
Right, I totally agree. And
Right, take my close.
let's do it properly this time.
Properly, one-off.
A one-off. And then we won't have to bother again, then, will we?
What do you think the response would be
in the Shropshire Star and on BBC Radio Shropshire when the announcement is made by Keith Barrow that this council is going to spend £200,000 plus, because remember the scaffolding group defensive on a new statue. In these times of austerity, when council jobs are going and services are being lost.
How much did they spend on the slinky? Down at the bottom of Marble. And that, as far as I'm concerned, that was a complete...
Well, that was Shrewsbury and Action Council who commissioned that, wasn't it?
Well, surely we could spend this sort of money.
You reckon?
Okay. How much the elements cost?
Okay, right. Okay, that's your view, right? Gentlemen over here, one there, and then back over here. Anybody this side as well? By the way, sticking to the others, the conversation here.
I was working in the council when the other one was taken or done, which is 1995. And if we'd added the cost of that one, the cost of this together, it would have replaced it new. In other words, the 200,000, it cost nearly 100,000 the last time.
Yeah, but we're here now, aren't we? What would you do now?
I would take it down and put a new one on.
Replace.
Replace.
Because
then, as the other gentleman said, it's done for 100 years.
Right, gentleman here, go on.
We could easily take the statue down and just have the Doric column as somewhere for a viewpoint, or because we can go up it, health and safety would let you go up it, I'm sure. You could make use of that as a tourist attraction. As to what we would do with the statue, the majority of our antiquities in museums are in boxes and they're not on show. A good 2/3 of them we can't see. So there's no point putting, we don't have to stick him somewhere. We could put him in a nice box, in a nice controlled storeroom somewhere. We don't have to do something right away. So we could go through in stages.
You do, because
hang on, gentleman in front of you doesn't like what you just said. Go on, you do, but what?
You do have to do something with it. If it's going to the music hall, they're currently designing the interior of the music hall and where all the cabinets are going and what's being displayed. So if the council makes its decision, it could be put in a box, but if it's going to the music hall, they need to know pretty quickly because they need to get on with their designs. If they're going to stick to budgets and if they're going to open on time.
Sarah, how would you feel as English Heritage coming around here again if it were put in a box and we just give the column as it is?
It's clearly not ideal, but it's certainly better than grinding up and putting in a skip, that's for sure, because you don't lose the evidential value. I think that the aesthetic value of the column would be sorely affected, and it is designed and looks like something which should have something on the top of it. So I could see it getting a certain amount of notoriety as that column that doesn't have a statue on it, and it becoming the landmark for that reason, which maybe wouldn't be so impressive for the residents of Shrewsbury, and not such a thing of pride and local identity.
Okay, Colin, you wouldn't want to put him in a box. Take the microphone.
No, I think, as we've seen, this is part of Shrewsbury's identity, local identity. It's an important feature on the skyline. It's our watch now, so as to speak, and what we're trying to do is to find the most effective solution in taking it forward into the future.
You wouldn't want to put him in a box, would you?
No, and to be truthful, you put them in a box, that's costs. You see these pretty awful paintings on the wall, they were all costing us money because they were in storage. And you'll see them all around the building, we stuck them on the wall, saves for storing them, and paying money to keep them in.
Okay, Lady.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Hannah Fraser, I'm the local councillor for Abbey Ward, so I thought you might be interested to hear what people have been saying to me over the last year in sort of answer to similar questions.
It's in your ward, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
not
right.
in the column ward.
No, it's in Abbey Ward, yeah.
By yards.
Just to confuse me, yes, just by yards. So I've been asking people, lots of people have been making comments to me about what's happening with the column, when all the scaffolding comes down, all the gates come down. So as I've been going around talking to people, I have been asking, what would you do? And by a fairly large majority, most people say they really wouldn't like an empty column, but they don't really like the idea of keeping on chucking money after money after money, so why not replace it? So that would sort of by about 70% of people who have asked.
That's what most people have said to you, is it replace?
Yeah.
Do they know how much?
No, nobody's known any of these figures yet.
So what do you think
it's
now?
very
If
interesting to see
you
this.
work a round figure of 250,000, say, with all the bits and bobs, what do you think people would say to that?
I think most people would use common sense. I mean, if you take into account that the scaffolding and all the rest of it that has to be done every time with repair costs, so let's call that 100, then most people would say, well, why, pretty soon you're going to make up your 350,000, aren't you? That's going to be just 15 or 25 years worth of expenditure.
So if it was decided that you
do that, you replace them for 300,000 or so. Could you defend that as the headwind then comes towards you? People saying, "What the heck are you doing with our money?"
I think it would be very interesting to see how everybody would respond to a sort of call to all the people that live in Shrewsbury as to whether they like to put their money in the pocket and put a quid or a fiver in to help save Lord Hill. Would public subscription got them up there in the first place? How much would them keep them up there?
Okay, Keith, public subscription, that's an obvious idea, I suppose, a good idea.
Yeah, public subscription and looking for all grants we can get. The total cost you're probably talking about to replacing in Codestone is probably in the region of 325 to 350,000, including on costs. And the process of getting it made would take about 18 months.
Right, but 350 grand, top whack, and that's 100 years.
Yes.
Who's in favour of that? Stick your hand in the air if you think that's the right way to go. It's a no-brainer. Right, anyway, so we'll all go together, shall we? That's fine, okay.
You're right, the 10 years.
Thank you. Who thinks we should perhaps repair? Does anybody think we should repair? That's what you wanted to know. That's it.
Seems a pretty clear message to me. And could we have a show of hands who's willing to think of public subscription to top up the grant rather than just lumbering the poor taxpayer?
Public subscription, stick your hand in there.
As well as
yeah. Okay, fine, all right. Thank you very much. Gentleman over there wanted to say something. This is going to be interesting. If it pans out like this, I'd like to see the headlines and the papers. I'd like to see the callers to BBC Radio Shropshire. But it's okay, it's good. Thank you.
I'm Tony Hill. I'm a past chairman of the Tiles and Architectural Ceramics Society, which is a national body which is very interested in material like Codestone. So as you might imagine, I favour a Codestone replacement. But just on issues of funding and so on, clearly the money is going to come from a number of sources, and this will only happen from sources like lottery funding if a very good case is made for the significance of the column. Now, Sarah Lewis has presented a very strong case for the significance of the column in various categories. But if you look at the listing description which English Heritage have of the column, it doesn't even actually mention the fact that the statue is made of Codestone at all, despite the fact that this was actually the largest piece of Codestone, albeit not in a single piece, that was ever manufactured. And another point for English Heritage, you mentioned the Nelson Monument in Great Yarmouth. That is Grade 1 listed, as opposed to our Grade 2-star column. And I'd be interested to know if any exercise has been carried out comparing the significance of that structure, which no longer has any Codestone on it at all, with the column in Shrewsbury.
Sarah?
There were 2 points there, weren't there? The second one was whether any comparison's been carried out, and no, I'm not aware that has been carried out, although I would have thought it would depend a little bit when the Great Yarmouth one was listed, because Lord Hill was, it sounds like you know.
Yeah, the Great Yarmouth one, I think, was listed in 1953, the same as the column. And I suspect then Nelson was seen as the great hero, and Lord Hill has always been a sort of much more shadowy figure in national terms. So I think we've heard tonight there's lots of other evidence that not just Lord Hill, but the Hill family in Shropshire are very, very significant. And this should be part of our bid to do something about the column and get money for it from a variety of sources.
I think if they were listed, because Lord Hill was 1953 listing as well, so I'd be really surprised if there was no comparison done at the time, and actually that's something I can look into and check out, and will do so. The Great Yarmouth column had a large number of figures and was surmounted by a quite flamboyant figure of Britannia, I think. So whether there was an aesthetic reason for the higher grading, again, I don't know, but I will look into that. You mentioned the first part of your question was to do with the list description. And the paucity of information in the list description, I think, reflects the fact that it's an early listing. At that time, the intention was simply to put enough information down so that people would recognise that they were looking at the right thing as they read the list description. So it was simply for identity rather than for description. Current listings are much longer and go into much more detail about what the significance and the value of the item is. And I would expect if it was rewritten, then clearly the codestone would be mentioned.
Is that an offer for English Heritage to rewrite the listing description? Because my concern is that if an outside funding body reads the listing description, it doesn't actually talk it up very much, whereas a summary of what you told us tonight would make a very, very much more convincing case for national funding.
I'm not sure that it's an offer to rewrite the list description for
well,
you.
Maybe you could look at it again.
But
Could you not look at it again?
It's certainly an offer from me to put down what the significance of the column is in writing for Shropshire Council. And I would hope that that would go some way to addressing funders' concerns about how significant it was. It's another department that does the listing descriptions, and I can certainly approach them. But it'll be a lot quicker if I write down what I said.
It's probably written it down already. If you want a transcript of that, no problem at all. Is it another department? It's not a trick question. Just it's another department that handles the money. It's not you, is it?
No.
I'm getting to the money side.
Yeah. One department does a listing. That's not the department I work for. I work for the department that contributes to decisions on alterations to listed buildings, and indeed distributes the funding.
Ah. So we might be talking to the right person.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, I'll come down to you in a second. I was just thinking that if we had public subscription and we had Shropshire Council chucking a few bob in, what about it? English Heritage. 3-way split. We're in.
I think my boss would probably sack me if I promised in front of all of these people a certain amount.
Tell him you got that into it.
We have indeed had an application for grant aid from the council, which we're considering at the moment. I think there's a significant difference, however, between English Heritage providing grant aid to help repair the historic and original statue, and grant aid for the creation of a replacement.
Even though the replacement, let's face it, Sarah, will be more cost effective over a 100-year period, and it ain't going to make us quite a difference of what you can see from the ground.
That's right, but I think that English Heritage has to prioritise its funds for the repair of historic fabric rather than the creation of replacement fabric. So that would be a big issue for us.
Okay, gentlemen.
That goes into the nub of what I was going to ask, and that is, if it was replaced with the codestone replacement, how would that alter the significance of the structure in English Heritage's view?
Well, it will alter the significance because obviously a certain weight is given to the fact that, although resurfaced, the original sculpture does remain up there. However, any decision about change of that nature has to be balanced. And the long-term sustainability of keeping the statue up there is an issue. So that would be considered, and I think that if the case was made by Shropshire Council that it was impossible to maintain him, and that looking into the future, his lifetime was his life horizon was ever diminishing, then there is potential that it could be acceptable to replace him with a replica, as has been done elsewhere.
And do you think, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, and half of it apologises, but half of it doesn't. Do you think that would there be a preference for what you put in its place in terms of what it's made of, from English Heritage's point of view, if you would do them?
Oh, certainly. I think that Codestone, and I think that to use Codestone would be positive as well, potentially in terms of raising funding for the exercise, because undoubtedly we would learn more potentially about the way that the original statue had been made by the creation of the replica. And if you were able to introduce some skills and training element into the exercise as well, those are the sorts of things which will appeal to other funders like the HLF and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. And just another point, one of the reasons the Flaxman ended up getting the money was because they had Friends of the Flaxman set up. Yeah. And that showed the people who we were applying to grants for that the public really supported and were behind the idea. And something like that might be appropriate.
Okay, we'll get on to that. Any more thoughts initially about... I'm a bit busy at the minute.
Could we have a vote of people present on the replacement alternatives?
On the alternative materials?
Yes.
Okay, we'll go with that one for you. Okay, let's go from the bottom. Who would fancy cast concrete? Nobody. Who would fancy bronze? 2, 3.
Can you just tell us what can, for instance, the construction of the column support a bronze statue up the top there?
Colin? Yes.
Hollow.
It's hollow. Hollow
It's a
bronze.
hollow.
Yes. So there's 3 for bronze. Let's move on. Cast fiberglass. Nobody likes that. Oh, yes. 2 gentlemen. Okay. Codestone. Yeah, there we go. Overwhelming. Stone carving. The most expensive stone carving. It's Codestone, without doubt. It is Codestone by the looks of that.
That's clear.
Any more on money for a minute? Because I want to move on and do other things. But go on.
May I suggest, concerning funding, that when he's replaced, that parts of his body are auctioned off, like the head or each arm or each
What? Just give Sarah a blue fit. You wouldn't have that, would you? You wouldn't want that, would you?
I do feel a little sick about the idea of dismembering him.
I think when we're talking about the costs, we ought to talk about the total costs.
Well, the Codestone was 350. I mean, you can add it there if you want.
I'm just thinking costs have a habit of at least doubling, so I think we ought to be very clear as to what the total costs are, and then what portion of would Shropshire Council be perhaps prepared to pay. Because for me, that would be a key thing, particularly in terms of austerity. Could it be spent on other things? So I would be a bit bored if a lot of money gets spent on.
What if we said, let's make it easy. What if we said it was going to cost 330,000 for the Codestone with all the on costs and everything else? Yeah, 330. And let's make it dead easy and say it was a three-way split between public subscription, English Heritage, and Shropshire Council. Would you, Council and Shropshire Council, spending 110,000?
No, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
What's your limit? You say, okay, we'll do it. That's fine.
I would. That's a very difficult question, but certainly,
Yeah, but you criticise them if they spend the money, wouldn't you? So I need to know what level you'd say they should go to.
50,000.
50,000. Okay. Anybody think the council should spend more than 50,000? If you go.
Steph over there had her hand up, and she's actually in charge of our assets. So she's obviously desperate to say something.
Sitting in the back quietly.
We don't have 100,000.
How are you? Come with me.
Let's find a chair for this lady, shall we? She's in charge of our assets. She thought she was hiding at the back, but not anymore. There you go, Steph. What did you want to answer? It's all right, you blame him, not me. What did you want her to answer?
No, I just wanted to ask a question. I wanted to ask a question as a resident. And whilst I accept everything, and I'm an ex-military person too, and I have a great love for the structure, and I don't have a great love for him as in his current state. And I think a public subscription to replace him would be fantastic, but I would like to have a debate about what we did with him if we brought him down, because he really is very unpretty. And I would not support the council covering the costs of housing him if we could have replaced it on the top.
You wouldn't want to put him in a box?
No, well, I wouldn't want to put him in the music hall.
Well, no, apparently he's got a very big con.
It's just completely ugly. It has been replaced. It's been replaced so many times. I don't know any of us who would really like to see him at ground level.
No, I would.
What?
Somebody would? Yeah. So I can start on the debate.
Do you want to sit back there or stay there? You can choose. You would like to see him at ground level?
Yes, I'd like to see him at ground level.
Even with his big nose?
Yes, by the lions. I think he'd look lovely there.
By the lions?
By his own lions. At the base of the column.
Oh, right. Oh, bring him down and put him there. What would you put on top there?
Oh, modern art.
Modern art? Oh, I love it. I love it. Get better by the minute.
Right, Andrew Vanderman.
Yeah, but you still have to repair him if you bring him down.
If you bring Andrew.
Which is more cost.
Thank you. I didn't really mean to do anything but listen tonight, but actually that last point does interest me, because I think one of the things that we're not good at historically in this town and this county is interpretation. And I think that the things that we've heard this evening are news to many of us. And actually, they shouldn't have been news to many of us. We should have places where we can learn about people who are really significant and important in our history. And
you mean Paul's talk about the
exactly.
Man, yeah?
And I think actually there is a case to be made for putting the original statue as it is and interpreting it in a particular place, so we can learn about the significance and the interest of the family and the military history. I perhaps should not then go on to say that personally I wouldn't mind just to see the tallest Doric column in the world
with nothing on the top,
standing there with nothing on the top, because I think it is of interest in itself, and it's certainly as I believe, it is actually the Doric column that is unique. Yes, okay, the statue is unique as well, but that I think can be interpreted as it is. I've said enough.
Right. So you would repair it and put it somewhere nice and safe where he's not going to get blown by the wind?
I wouldn't necessarily repair him or spend a great deal of money on it, because I think actually what is interesting is what has happened to the Codestone. And that the fact that this is what it is after 200 years. I mean, all over the country in different museums, we see statues in terrible repair, don't we? And we don't say, oh, that's bad, we should have had the shoulder on that one. And I think that could be part of the interpretation of the Codestone.
Okay, all right. But the column with nothing on the top.
See, Sarah's a bit worried about that, the navigation point of turn left by the column. But I know it's a valid point about the column. Keith, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, the point is, I mean, you couldn't just take him down and stand him somewhere, because lumps are falling off him. He's 17 foot high. If a chunk of him falls off, even at ground level, it's going to do some serious damage. And two, and which you did agree, we can't really afford, if we're going to replace him, that's got to be our focus. Can we really afford to spend more money making him look good? So, I don't think so.
Okay,
right, gentlemen here,
Okay, there's quite a few points. The last one was to do with what do we do with the old one. We keep it the same way the British Museum will keep an Egyptian statue that's fallen apart, or a great statue. We keep it behind glass. We've got a new museum coming up. Why can't we? Partnerships. Now, everything that we do, we get here in the council talking about partnerships. So we've got public, private, public subscription on top of that. we've got grants, we've got the government itself, the culture secretary, I believe it's coming. So why can't he be approached? And we've already decided that we want to replace him. Anyway, not to leave him there.
Right, so replace him.
I've covered those.
Okay.
How much money, with this gentleman here, we were talking about how much money the council will put in, and he said 50 grand or so. How much money did they ought to put more than that, gentleman?
Can I just ask if you could put the cost in?
Put the cost thing back up, Garrett. There we go.
Are you realistically telling me that you can take that statue off that column and put a code stone structure up for £200,000?
350. 350.
It's £500,000, isn't it?
Pass the microphone over, Colin. I'll let you know the answer.
We had a chat with Colin. Colin says, realistically, the figure's around 350,000. That's the figure we're looking at. 200,000 would be the cost of making.
We have a history in Shrewsbury of having these quotes, and they never come in and say, think about the music hall and that thing down by the Welsh Bridge. That fit, we will never put that statue on there in Coldstone for 200,000 plus the extras.
It's 350 only.
It's £500,000.
Gentlemen.
You started the meeting this evening, Mr. Barrow, about saying you wanted to save 80 million, or your task is to save 80 million. So save 80 million and a half of a million, and you've got your money to pay for the statue.
Hang on before you do. So what would you do with the statue?
I'd put it in the music hall, securely in the corner somewhere, keeping the public 6 foot away from it.
As it is.
No, it is.
You can't put him in the corner. He's 17 foot high.
They are
What does he
the
weigh?
music hall, they're big enough.
How much of him is original now?
That much. Not his hand, but that much.
He weighs, he's 17 foot high, he weighs about 25 tons. You can't stick it in the corner.
You say it's about the size of your hand. It's not his hand, but about the size of your hand is original.
It's original. Yeah.
That's it.
So we're not saving anything original?
You don't need a microphone. Go on, keep going. Yeah. We're not saving anything original.
No.
No. We're not saving anything original, Sarah.
There's nothing left.
The
except
column is
something the size of his hand, so why are we making all the fuss?
I don't like to disagree with you, but actually, there's more than the size of his hand. That's
I'm talking about the external.
of the external fabric that's visible, but the core of the structure largely remains codestone. He's had a replacement leg, and then he's had a replacement.
Is that, sorry, the leg is the main single component that's been replaced, and then the rest of it, they replaced an ear, and then the rest of it is bits.
He's had a new leg and a new ear.
So he's had a new leg and a new ear and a new sort of top coating, but the rest of it is original codestone structure.
Okay. Let's talk to Peter Nutty. Peter from Shrewsbury Action Council. Mr. Nutty.
And the Town Council and Shropshire Council.
Yeah.
I'd like to see Lord Hill at the top of the column, and ideally I think the codestone is the option that we should be looking at. I think it all comes down to money, doesn't it, really, because that's the popular option. How much grant money do we, and I'm looking at the lady there, do we think is available from the various sources, and how much cash would we need to raise? Because I think from local sources, and I've got Helen Hall next to me from the Town Council, I'm sure that we can get a chip in from there, and a little bit from Shropshire Council, and there's local joint committees, you know, by chipping in here and there, I'm sure we can raise some money. But how much money would we need to raise to actually trigger grant applications, or lottery money, or English heritage money, or whatever options exist?
Peter, would you favour a three-way split? 100,000 apiece, 110,000 each. That's what
usually work quite simply.
No, I know that, but you know,
yeah,
100,000.
I'd go for something like that.
And you wouldn't worry about the council putting £100,000?
I think it's such an important part of the history of Shrewsbury. You sometimes just have to bite the bullet on money. You know, and yeah, it's a lot of money in the present circumstances. But what do? You know, you can't leave the column with nothing on. You really would look, you know, we look silly.
You'll have a saw in the column down next.
I've lived in Shrewsbury a long time. It's been part of the fabric of the town for all the time I can remember, and I think it's an important landmark for the town. And you've got to think, what would people in 50 years look back and think of us if we didn't replace it and do something with it? They'd say, what a load of silly people.
Are you still on Shrewsbury Council?
Yeah.
Have you got any money?
No.
Have you? It's got money.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's not. I don't have the power to spend it. You know.
Don't blame it on Helen. It's not your
And I
place.
it's Helen.
No.
But there would have to be a discussion. But I'm sure there would be some.
Can I make a couple of points?
You can.
Thank you, Peter. The first point, it's come through loud and clear from everybody that the desired course to go forward is to get a new Codestone statue being made and put up there. That's what we all want to do. You couldn't have the column, in my opinion, with nobody on top, and we voted on it, and that's what everyone thinks. So that's the decision, we're clear on that, right? So that's the point.
Are you happy that you may well go forward that way then?
Absolutely, that's the whole purpose of it.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Second point, and Peter makes a good point, Shrewsbury Town Council, public subscription, various grant sources, but what we actually need to do before we can actually find where the money's coming from is in my opinion, and I mentioned it before, if we can get a Friends of Lord Hill statue started, we can then try to start putting grant applications in. We can show public support for what we're doing, which is going to be very, very important when accessing money, and we can look at all the different sources of funding we can get. And the third point is, the good news is, because we're doing a temporary repair, which we have to do, because quite frankly something could fall down and kill someone, we've got 5 or 6 years to get the money. It's not something I'm going to have to find tomorrow. And that time will give us a chance to look at every option we can for getting money in, to start a public subscription, and start getting some interest. I thought the talk about Lord Hill at the beginning was fascinating. And I think we could incorporate something like that in the museum at the musical when it's finished. We could, this is another start. This is another phase in what's happening with the column. We've got a video record of what's taking place.
That's the point, isn't it? It's a very good point, isn't it? Do we do enough in this town, and in this county for that matter, to educate people about our wonderful history?
I
didn't know most of it.
I don't think we do. I didn't know most of it, and I think I'd love to hear the full 40 minutes at some point. But with modern technology, there's no reason why, as part of the musical exhibition, we can't include something about Lord Hill. And using modern technology that people can actually know, because that guy is obviously iconic, and most people on the street wouldn't have had the foggiest idea. As you said in the paper, somebody thought he was an admiral, for God's sake.
No, they thought he was Clyde of India. It's true, isn't it? That's what they thought, Clyde of India. Oh my God. From what you've heard, Paul, and your affection for this man here, would you be pretty happy if they said, we'll replace him in Codestone?
Absolutely delighted. That's the right way to go, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, lady here. Carry on. Let me come around this way. Put that lady.
I was just thinking, if the decision is going to be taken to replace him, why can't there be some sort of bandaging done around him to keep him in one piece? Because we're just throwing good money after bad, like we would on a rusty old car, if we're going to replace him. Why can't he be bandaged up and left till we can afford to take him down?
We could look at certainly doing a temporary repair, but a big chunk of the money we're spending now is on the scaffolding anyway. And even if you were doing what you say, we've still got to put the scaffolding up to get to him.
Why are you putting the scaffolding?
But if the decision is to replace him with the Codestone statue, which I'm saying it is, and I'm happy to go with that, we'll obviously look at spending as little as we can to make him safe. But to take this gentleman's point, which no one actually, you're 50,000, we don't have any money at all to spare at the moment, and taking 80 million out of savings target over the next few years is going to involve an awful lot of people losing their jobs, and an extra £500,000, an extra lot of people losing their jobs, and we're not going to do that. We over 5 years we can find some funding, but the core funding's got to come from grant applications, public subscription, Shrewsbury Council chip in a bit, and we'll find some.
Right. I'll move on to the Friends bit. I want to explore the Friends in a second. But let me just ask a question about the scaffolding. Aren't you a bit previous in putting scaffolding up there now? Why are you putting it up there now?
Because if we didn't, we couldn't put enough fencing around it to protect somebody getting killed if a lump fell down. So the scaffolding's going up to catch anything that might fall off him. There's not many things that keeps you awake at night, to be truthful, but the thought of a lump of him falling down and and killing someone is one of the things that I'm not going to allow to happen.
All right, well, I'll come to you in a second. 1 second, here we go.
Well, why don't you just take him down? Now.
Take him down, now.
The scaffold's going up, take him down. And then you can build a new one.
I think that's worth looking at. I think that's worth looking
Say
at.
50,000.
If we took him down, well, let me ask, I don't want to put you on the spot, is that an option, taking him down? And with a view that we're going to replace him with another codestone, is that an option?
I think it's a very pragmatic, solution in terms of making the most out of the funding that's available. Obviously, we have to put in an application for demolition, which is where English Heritage gets.
Oh, that's a bit harsh. You could say careful removal.
No, I think that's a really valid point, because we've got money in the budget to carry out the repairs. If it was practicable and English Heritage could be persuaded as part of the project to actually replace him, that was something we could do. Any money we can save for the money we budgeted could automatically go towards the replacement.
What's your gut feeling? So, I know I keep putting you on the spot, and you can't promise things, but what do you reckon? It's not a bad idea, is it?
You just want me to make a decision now, don't you?
Sign here. No, it wouldn't be a bad idea, would it really?
No, I think that if you were to make an application for the removal of Lord Hill, without including in that application the erection of a replacement Codestone statue, I think that would be problematic, frankly, because it would be, as Colin's described, demolition with no guarantee of anything going back up in the future.
But what if they said we promised to put another one back?
If the application was for his removal, his replacement with a Codestone statue, and clear plans for what you were going to do with him once you'd got him off, then that's something that clearly we would give consideration to.
Yeah, definitely.
Who thinks that's a good idea?
Yeah.
Done. Another no-brainer.
Done. End of meeting. Right, Peter, sir, just give us your credentials, will you?
I'm also a member of the Waterloo Association, and I came here to this meeting with an open mind. I've been very encouraged to hear the thoughts of other members of the public, and to hear the possibility of going forward with a Codestone replacement. When I heard about this meeting from Gareth, I unashamedly related to lobbying various people, who some of whom I knew, but very few, most of whom I didn't know. I had a very good response from people nearby and people in other bodies in the area. So that's very encouraging. So I think you've got a very worthwhile body of support. One of the first things that was said to me when I started this exercise was from somebody who lived in the town. And he said to me, every schoolboy in Shrewsbury knows who Lord Hill is. The gentleman on the front row assured us that's not the case. But as part of an ongoing replacement exercise, this could be very much built into the application, built into the system to improve on that situation. The statue, the Nelson column at Great Yarmouth, I've been doing some research on that, and that's interesting because nobody can actually tell me who owns it. Whether it's Norfolk County Council or Great Yarmouth Council or the Nelson Museum, nobody seems to know. But the actual figures on it, the main figure of Britannia and the four figures around the platform are fiberglass. And they raise income, or the Nelson Museum raise income in Great Yarmouth from guided tours of the column. And people go up the stairs one at a time on a ticket, and that's good. So that's part of the Friends thing which you're coming to. Before you do, you've been writing your headlines this evening. You've been telling telling Keith that he hasn't got the money to spend, and he didn't say that.
I've been asking the question.
But we all know that there's no money available in local authority. The Shropshire Star about 3 weeks ago had 2 consecutive headlines, 2 consecutive evenings. First, they were going to dismiss half the non-educational staff, which Keith's already referred to. Following that, they were going to sell the building that we're in. Now, you know, these are the headlines that you were asking this poor councillor to defend. We surely are giving her a very good case that funding can be raised on a national basis to do this job, do it properly, and be proud of it.
Okay, and by doing it properly, you're in favour of the Codestone option, are you?
Replacement in coastal. Okay, fine. Let's talk about whether or not then it's a feasible thing, Colin, to once it's all done and sorted and dusted and everything else, to get people going back up to the top of the column again, because you used to be able to do that.
That's right, and it's very much an ambition to reinstate that opportunity.
You had to go and get the key, though, didn't you?
Well, at the moment, we have the guided tours to Shrewsbury, and our tourism officers have said that if one of the outcomes of tonight's meeting is this desire to make it accessible again, then I'm sure that a system can be arranged where we can take guided tours, or there can be some form of access, and whether some tickets, as our friend suggested, all help in terms of putting money into the coffers to inform, to provide opportunities for school groups to understand about Lord Hill. That's all something which would actually enhance its value and its esteem in the community.
So we could do more with it as an attraction, going to your book.
That's right, yes.
Many of you have been up to the top of the column, and I was fortunate to do that a few years ago as well, and I got out the door at the top there and went round it like that, to be perfectly honest. You went up there once when the railings weren't there, didn't you? I had to go straight back in that door a bit quick. It's a bit scary, I imagine. No, it's like, yes.
Yeah. I've also had a letter from a member of the public to say that they could make available a photograph of the lovely gentleman that we can make sales of in order to raise funds for the replacement too. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
After the last repair, when Lord Hill went off to London on holiday, when he came back, I met up with the County Council and provided them with an open day here. And in the foyer downstairs, I had a display of Lord Hill's memorabilia and some Waterloo bits and pieces that were of interest. I also had some war gamers here. I'm not into war gaming, but they came along, which was quite interesting. I had guides on the road taking groups up there, because we did that by telephone appointment before the day. I had David Trumper on our local historian, who's well known. We had to push him up the stairs, but he was on the balcony pointing out the areas of interest. So we're incorporating, Sharp Hall, Lord Hill, and looking around at what's going on in Shrewsbury. Total cost to the county council was 6 lunches, which were sandwiches, and although we offered to carry that on a regular basis, it never happened again.
I think
but it can be done. It's not hard work.
You change your mind on that now. It's a free gift, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Free gift.
Right, let's get on to the friends. Is there any appetite for setting up, maybe not necessarily right this very minute, but we can start the ball rolling here, can't we? Any appetite for setting up a Friends of Lord Hill, Friends of Lord Hill Column? Right, can we just have a ladies there as well? You'd be happy to be at the forefront of this.
Yes, but I'd like to know how you got up there.
You'd like to know how you got up there?
Don't look at me.
Pulleys.
Pulleys. Right.
Pulleys. It's easy to get it right, I suppose, but there we are. Right. Who would be interested in perhaps, you're not going to be, as I said, not going to be signed up right now in this very minute, who would be interested in joining the Friends of the Lord Hill's Column, whatever you're going to call it? Yeah? Okay? Yeah? Well, that's reasonably encouraging to start with, isn't it, Keith?
I think it's very good. I think that's the key to the whole job, actually, because I repeat, the flats mob, but one of the reasons it got the money was because we could show public support for it. And the Friends of the Flats mob will do exactly that.
Now, we are by no means anywhere near here. You've said tonight, and you told me before we started, that, open mind, let's let's see what people think. And it was genuine, and I appreciate it, and I take your word for that, that was genuine. So now we're talking about spending £350,000, or maybe £500,000, if that gentleman's got his thoughts right? But you said you haven't got any money at all at the moment, so where do you start now?
Well, I think, I'll tell you what I'm willing to do. Shall I stand up?
Please do.
I promise you'll be involved in the decision-making process, not the consultation process, which is quite revolutionary by council terms. What I will tell you now, we will go away, and we will go away on the decision that we're going to replace him with the Codestone statue, because that's what everybody wants, and I think it's absolutely the right thing. I think Peter Nutting made the point. It's iconic for Shrewsbury, and not to have him there would be a terrible thing. So and the decision-making process, which we got slated for in the press, the decision-making is devolved to the relevant cabinet member, which people said was undemocratic. The decision process lies with me, right? So I can tell you that that's why we'll be producing a report to go out to the public. That's what we'll do. We'll work on replacing him. 2, we'll replace on getting the Friends group together as soon as we possibly can, and we'll investigate the possibilities of what to do with him when we've taken him down. And I think that gentleman's point, I don't know your name, sir, but if we can save money that we've already got in the budget for repairing him, that's a good start to put into a pot to take it forward. And once we've got that structure in place, we'll start working on getting grants and launching, various ideas to raise money from the public.
You don't forget, when you're doing this budget, you've got to add on, if we take him down, there's all that cost involved, there's the storage cost involved, and then there's also the repair cost involved. So you may as well just put the whole thing in one budget and have done with it.
I tend to think the gentleman said £500,000.
I think £500,000. Yeah.
I think when you take over...
Is that right, is it?
Well, I know as much as you do, Eric. The figures
I've
I've been given...
a lot more than me, I'm just asking the question.
Well, the figures we were given are 350,000, but I think you made a very valid point. We weren't talking about, what we were talking about was the cost of replacing the Codestone statue. By the time we've taken him down, found somewhere for him to go, I'm not saying it's going to be £500,000, but it's certainly going to be substantial.
£40,000 for putting the scaffold up and repairing it, budging it up a bit. I can't honestly see how you can get a new statue out there for another 50,000.
I think the key point is, we don't know the exact financial figures. It could be, we've got 200,000 for making a new one, but we need to find that out. But we couldn't really do that until we made a decision that we were going to replace him.
Right, Peter, I've gone a long way around, but we're getting close to the end, guys. If you want to make a point, make it tonight, then you know that you've had the opportunity.
One of the sources of income for something like this might be the local quarrying companies, because they have a conscience. They realise they're making a big scar in the countryside when they dig these holes, and they're very good at actually trying to win friends of local people by funding projects. And in the past, I know various village halls have had money from some of the quarrying companies, and the next time a big application comes in, it's a good time to sort of, through either legal agreements or Section 106 agreements, to encourage them.
That's the quid pro quo, isn't it? You do this and we
we'll let you dig a great big hole, but we want you to tip it a bit towards the... And the quarrying companies, especially because, I know it's not exactly stone, but it's all part of the stone ethos, and that's one of the sources I'd be going to look for money.
Yeah, and I think the point is, we've got to a point where we know we want to replace him. We need to get firm figures, and we need to get the Friends up and running, and then we can work from that. And those are the sort of ideas that will come from the Friends. I also believe if the grant application to the lottery comes from the Friends of Lord Hill statue, it will probably get a more favourable viewing than if it comes from a council.
Right, gentlemen here.
Thank you. I'm Rob Wexham, Property Client Manager at Shropshire Council, and I'm currently managing the budget for the repair works. To help you with the cost of the replacement option, the uncertainty we have at the moment that casts doubt into how much the actual replacement costs are, is what we have to do with the old statue when we take it down. Yes. And what would help us tremendously is an assistive view from English Heritage on a firm decision as to whether they require us to re-erect it and continue to maintain it, or whether we don't. Whether something like creating a smaller version of the existing statue that would be more appropriate in a more detail that are more respective of Lord Hill that could go in the music hall. If that were permissible, it would substantially reduce the replacement costs if we weren't also hamstrung with having to do the repair costs of the existing statue as well.
Sarah?
I'm not sure that I see the point of having a smaller version of Lord Hill on display, because the point of retaining the existing statue is the fact that it's surviving historic fabric, and we can learn things from that. So I don't know whether I would see the point of a smaller statue in the music hall. I can quite appreciate with the size that he is, that the designers of the music hall may not wish to have a huge amount of space taken up with him. And so clearly some investigation needs to be gone into about where there is potential for him to go, and I don't know all the places that you might think of. So you would need to look into that.
We've got to move on because we're very near the home time. Gentlemen here, then lady.
As Andrew Bannerman said earlier on, he thinks a bit better when he's taken down in his present condition, possibly in the music hall. As far as the height's concerned, should we put him in a coffin with a glass lid?
Scary or what? 17-foot coffin with a glass lid, there you go. Right, our councillor from the Abbey.
I just wondered whether Lord Hill, if he was going to come down, could go under the bubble roof of the new Riverside shopping development, which is a sort of inside-out location. The new Riverside shopping development, if it goes ahead, it's got a sort of outside-inside feel in it. It's got a clear plastic roof over lots of it joining the building, so maybe you could go there. I don't know.
That's interesting. Okay. Any final points, guys? Because we've got to go home. We've got to go home. Gentleman there in the back. Got to move on very quickly. No, 2 or 3 minutes, then we're finished. Sir?
Yeah, a lot of comments about what to do with the old statue and so on. I mean, all I've heard about it to date is that it's made of coastone and therefore the core of it is important and so on. I've heard nothing to say that it actually have any artistic merit at all as a sculpture. So why are we talking about keeping it? When you say bin it, we've replaced it, get on with the old one. That's our point of having a replacement, isn't it?
Sarah, sell them on eBay. Sarah's got shins over down her spine and some opinion, haven't you? It's against your whole principle, isn't it, for the bidding? You can't do that.
I'm in the construction industry and I agree with this guy behind that it's going to cost more than that. But I like the idea of putting up a replacement, and I think with the time scale it's going to take to get a replacement, that gives you a bit of breathing space. But I think there's an awful lot of merit in taking him down now and storing him, repairing him at ground level, and saving this money that you've got to do for the safety barrier around the bottom, and the birds were doing it 130 feet up.
Keith, you got it. That's it. That's the conclusion. Generally,
yeah, I think the whole thing's been very clear there. Actually, I think we've got a lot of consensus on what we want to do going forward. I think the point you make, which is an incredibly good one, is we have got a little bit of time. We'll have to go away and investigate and talk to Sarah and English Heritage about the idea of bringing him to ground level. But if we are going to go ahead and make a replacement, to me, that sounds like common sense.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Would you say thank you to our panel and our ad hoc members? Thank you for coming. We hope you got something out of that tonight. I think there was a reasonably firm conclusion there as to which way you should go.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Safe journey home. Thank you very much.